Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics common to both the PowerBasic console and Windows compilers. Today we will look again at the monitoring and conditional deletion of archive or log files. Following the release of our last video, it became obvious that some of our subscribers are using older versions of PowerBasic. These older versions of PowerBasic may not have the full access to the Powertime class. So what we're going to do today is to amend our archive file application to run without having to use any Powertime classes. In order to do that, I'm going to limit the application so that it will only calculate the number of days between the current date and the date on a file. So we will save this source code file and call it archive files days only. I'll leave the original archive files in here so that you can check to see the difference between the two. And the include file we use, the pb archive files, we're also going to change. We'll rename it as pb archive files days only. As you will remember from the last video, the purpose of this application is to search a selected folder, look to see what files are in that folder, remove any files that do not fall within our search criteria, and then delete or just log the rest. We do this using a archive files function. We're still going to have an archive files function, and the number of parameters passed to it will still be the same. So let's have a look at the include file. In our include file, since we're not going to be using the Powertime class, we need to add a couple of extra libraries. So I'm going to add these in at the top here. These are the pbdates extension library and the date functions library. We'll cover these when we come to use those functions. If we look further down into the archive files function, we're still going to allow logging and deletion, but the time period will only be days. So we will remove the option for minutes and hours. The scan folder function will be unchanged. The TrimFileList function is where most of our changes are going to be. And the log or delete will remain unchanged. So let's have a look at the TrimFileList. The TrimFileList function trims the array we have populated to remove any files that do not match the time period we're actually looking for. In here we had used the Powertime variable. Now we're not going to be using these, so I'll comment these two lines out. We're going to be using two string variables, one for the current date and one for the file date on the file itself. And we're going to create a system time variable to contain the date and time on the file we're actually looking at. And we can comment out these two next lines of code because they're using the Powertime class. And we're going to pick up the current date using a function within one of the libraries we've just added. In PowerBasic, the date $ command can be used to pull back the date in the month, day and year format, which is the US date format. I'm using a function called UKDate to pull back the UK format, which is day, month, year. So you can comment in or comment out the line of code that applies to the date function that you're going to be using. Our next step in the code is to look at each element of our array. This array contains a list of all the files and their details that exist in the folder we have specified. In our existing code, we were looking at a time period of minutes, hours or days. Each of these uses timediff, and timediff is part of the Powertime class. Now we're not going to be using these, so we'll comment this section of code out. So what are we going to be using instead of that? We have picked up the last write time which currently exists within our array. We need to actually convert that into a system time. We can do that using a Windows API call. And that call is file time to system time. It takes only two parameters. The first we're passing as a byval var pointer, and this is the element within our array, which contains the last write time. Our output from this function is the stm file date variable, which is a system time. Having populated this variable, we can now turn it into a standard date. Again, I'm going to be showing both the UK and the US format. All we're doing here is we're taking the system time stored in our file date and taking out the day, month and year and forming up a string into the file date variable which contains a zero filled date. So if we're using the UK format, it will be day day, month month, year year, separated by the backslash. If it's a US format, we'll be using month, day and year. Now we need to work out how many days are between the current date and the date we have found on the file. There's a function within one of our new libraries we've added which will do this quite nicely. This function is called getAllDaysBetween. It takes two parameters, the first being the date of the file and the second being the current date. As we'd expect the current date to be more recent, or at least the same as the file date, we'll put the file date first. And this will return a value in days, the number of days between these two dates. If both dates are the same, the value returned will be 0. If the file date is more recent than the current date, in other words the file date is sometime in the future, then we need to set our long sign to -1. And the code after that will pick that up quite nicely. It will test the value of a long sign, and if it is -1, it will report a future date time has been discovered. And the code after that will be comparing the number of days against the number of units that we were looking for. So if we're looking for files which are older than 30 days, this will function quite nicely. So as we've made these changes to TrimFileList, this should trim out any files that don't meet our criteria. So what we're left with should be the files which are either to be logged or deleted. So if we try a compile on that, it compiles quite cleanly. Currently we're set up to log any files which meet our criteria. If we have a look in the archive folder, which is the folder containing the files that we wish to query, we can see, as we did in our last video, this is the same range of files. There are some log files and there are some files with a txt extension. So if we try running our application now, it will run and it will create an archive log.txt file. And this will report on the files which are older than 30 days. So in summary, what we have done today is we have rewritten our archive files utility to function without having to resort to using Powertime. Hopefully those of you who are not using the most recent version of PowerBasic will be able to use this in your applications. However, that's it for today. Thank you for watching.